So I'm Martin Carcasson. I'm a communication studies professor here at CSU. Been here 20 years. 18 years ago, I started the Center for Public Deliberation of the CPD. So if you're not familiar with the CPD, it serves as an impartial resource for the Northern Colorado community. Actually, one of the courses I teach every semester, I train primarily undergraduates, some graduate students as facilitators. And then about 7 years ago, we became fee for service. And now we get hired by the city, by the county, by the school district, by the university to design meetings, all kind of based on this idea that democracy requires pretty high quality communication. We have to be able to have some tough conversations. As we'll get into a lot today, unfortunately, our brains aren't wired for those kind of conversations. We're naturally much more wired for outrage and polarization than we are for collaboration and deliberation. So the easiest way sometimes to explain what I do is create processes that are specifically designed to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and actually tap into the best. So what we're doing today, kind of got this two-step process, right? So for this first hour and 15 minutes is primarily presentation. It's a talk that I've probably now given in some form or another about 200 times. It's always my first day of class for the CPD, but I also give it a lot. I work a lot with city managers and libraries and extension agents and a whole bunch of people in different places. My work overall now is focused on how we build local capacity in communities for the kind of conversations and engagement that we need. But obviously, today is more about applying these concepts to the classroom, right? So this is the beginning of a collaboration between the CPD and TILT. I've been doing a little bit more of this year, particularly working with first year seminars and key communities and designing some exercises, pulling some exercises from our training and adapting them to classroom use. CPD over the years is also, I've had lots of professors that bring us in to kind of run a discussion every once in a while, and that is an option too. If there's something that you want that you can actually have the CPD kind of come in and run things. About wanting to really build a toolkit with TILT of how some of these tools that we've been learning the last 20 years running meetings in the community, how might those translate into the classroom, right? So first session is more the basic talk, the theory, the concepts behind the CPD and behind my own academic work on how do we change conversations and have better conversations. And then we'll have a little bit of a break. And if you're able to stay for the second half, that's going to be much more interactive and workshop-y. I've got a lot of more content and a lot of tools, but it'll be driven more by y'all. Like, what are y'all wanting to do and so forth and dig in. We won't have time to dig into all the tools for the next 15 minutes, but part of that will set the agenda for me for the rest of the semester as I'm working out. So I got to buy out from the provost office to be working on these things, right? So part of what y'all will do will be like a little focus group to say, of all these things I'm playing with that I think are useful for the classroom, which are most interesting to you, we'll dig into some of those, the second part, and then some of those I'll keep on working on and sharing. So what you have, not in front of you yet. So and it's little half sheets. I printed a few examples of things.
Thank you.
And free to take those if you want, but we got two QR codes on there. The one on the left is for PolEV. Normally when I give presentations, I do some audience interactions and have a question up. Yeah, so we'll play with that a little bit. The other QR code on the right is for now, just a Google Doc. That's just a resource page, has all my slides on it already. A lot of other articles, videos of other different kind of things. I'll update that a lot after this, particularly the second part, right? So what y'all are interested, what we spend time on, and I'll keep on updating that. Eventually that might become a toolkit on TILT's website or something like that, kind of more specifically. But for now, that will give you access to everything I'm talking about. I also pretty sure that link has commenting power as well. So on that document, if you want to ask some questions or those type of things, you'll be able to do that, right? Now, since we have a pretty small group, I figure it would be good to kind of go around and just kind of hear from all, introduce yourself kind of briefly. If you have, a couple sentences on why you came here, if there's particular things that you're wanting to learn, particular things that you're struggling with in the classroom, kind of let me know that. And I know do we have at least one online or one online?
Yep.
So we'll get to Mary. Hey, come on in. So, I'll start with.
Okay, my name is Teresa and I'm a new teacher to the Department of Communication Studies. I also work in the Student Disability Center as well.
Is there anything in particular that you're wanting to learn in terms of dealing with polarizing issues or?
Well, I think in the public deliberation speech, I would always like to, it's a speech that we have in public speaking, which is a fantastic one, but I would love to have some more skills, how to better facilitate and teach that. And I think just have this, having tools at this time of year, and it's sort of divisive to be able to just have productive conversations with other people.
Hi, good morning. Or good afternoon. I'm Colleen Burke and I'm in food science and human nutrition. And I speak to many racial and ethnic disparities in my classes, so I want to be prepared for that. I'm also going to be sailing on semester at sea in the spring semester. So, and to be prepared, and kind of lean into conversations because inevitably they come up on the ship in that smaller community and just our current climate this fall. There's a lot going on and there always will be. So to be better prepared for that.
Great.
Hi, Danielle Addis. I am a staff member here in Tilt. So I'm the coordinator of community engaged learning. So a lot of the work that I do is supporting professors who are in partnership with folks in community spaces and integrating that into academics. So the types of communication strategies that you're talking about, and I think the theoretical underpinning is a lot of what I'm looking at, supporting professors to be able to do both in the classroom, but then also between students and off-campus partners.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. Pronouns that she prefers, and I'm CSU Director of Teaching Excellence. I am very committed to those topics because we work with supporting faculty and learning environments in remaining welcoming, inclusive spaces during challenging times. So I'm very curious about deliberation, and I love this lens of wicked problems. I think it's always a very fruitful way of thinking about issues in teaching, learning, and beyond. So just happy to be here and learn from everyone.
Todd Rucker, Director of the University Composition Program and the English Department, and I'm here because this has been coming up a lot, and I'm involved a lot in training the new graduate instructors in our program.
Well,
So, there's some nervousness around the election and engaging with these topics, and various instructors feel more comfortable than others. So
Yeah.
I'm just interested in learning more about, stuff I can bring back to our faculty.
And I will say, it's not hard to get me to talk about this stuff, so if it makes sense for me to come in at some point to help with that.
Yeah. The classes.
Yeah.
Sue Doe, I'm Director of Tilt and Professor of English, and I was once the Director of Composition. And so I think the two worlds that, where I have the sort of the experience of the challenges associated with difficult, divisive topics are both the writing classroom, where we have upwards of 65 to 70 instructors, another 35 GTAs, a couple hundred sections of first year composition, another 100 or so sections of advanced composition. And so those classrooms, because they are small, invite conversation, but we are either more or less able to do that work well. And so I'm with Todd. It seems to me a really rich opportunity to explore what's possible. The other world that I worked in where this was really important and where I wish I'd had better skills was when I was chairing the faculty council. And I am happy to say that Martine was able to come to one of our meetings when we were working through the President McConnell's strategic planning exercise, and we had 250 faculty in a public deliberation, all entirely online because it was in the middle of the pandemic. And the skill sets that I saw in Martine's graduate students being able to do this work.
Mostly undergrads, actually.
Mostly undergrads,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. No, it is, students have to apply for my program, so I do have some quality control. It's not just whoever signs up, so it's a lot of honor
Well, you
students.
had one of my graduate students, so I thought they were all.
Yeah, there's some graduate students, but mostly undergrads.
So anyway, and certainly that period of time, 2020 to 2023, we were some issues in that space. And, so just the value of what you bring to the table is of great importance to me personally and professionally.
Appreciate that very much.
Hi, my name is Amanda Penley. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the operations manager at Tilt, so just providing logistics support, tech support. But I think this topic is really interesting. The university is obviously uniquely positioned, where we have an influx of young people who are forming their identities and creating dialogue about what they believe and values. And I think it's important that we model civility and language around these topics, but also have better tools that support that dialogue on campus. So excited to learn.
Still just have one online, or
Yes, Mary.
Mary, if you want to introduce yourself quick?
Also, feel free, Mary, if you'd like to type in the chat. Oh, but there you are. Hello.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I can't be there in person. My name is Mary Vogel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for semester at sea. As Colleen Burke knows well on the ship, if you have conflict, you can't just escape it. It's an environment, that's conducive to conversation and dialogue, but can be difficult. Recently, our organization partnered with an international organization that trains college students in dialogue facilitation. And I got to be a part of a little bit of that training, and it was great. And Rye Vigil has done some training for our faculty, but the more toolkits we can arm ourselves with, the better. So thank you for offering this workshop for everyone.
Okay, so we do have a camera crew in the back. This is part of the camera crew that's been doing a documentary on kind of the democracy efforts at CSU. So they're just gonna be capturing kind of some film, things like that. Hope y'all feel free speaking. If there's something that you want to kind of talk about, I guess we're videoing here too, right? So unfortunately, if you want to really kind of deal with a controversial issue, we'll do it during break, or obviously I'm happy to kind of work one-on-one. I spend a lot of time, how do we talk about these controversial issues that are easy to blow up on? So I do want to be a resource to all of y'all. Literally with some key leaders in the community, I won't say anything, they all have my cell number, so they can kind of just text me, because email is, the public, so they've got to dig into. So happy to be that kind of resource. So I'm going to jump in here, and I'm probably going to close the door because I've got a really loud voice. I think it's because my stuff's more interesting because their students want to be me, so maybe not. So as I said, this talk that I'm giving, I've probably given in some form or another about 250 times. Sometimes I have 15 minutes. I have a 15-minute version on my website that was like a TED Talk thing. Sometimes it's an 8-hour workshop. Often it's like 2 hours. I'm going to do it here in about an hour, kind of the first part to kind of get through the big picture, kind of theory, kind of background. As I go, I'll make connections to classrooms, but I want y'all to be making those connections too. And again, the second half is all going to be more about those connections. That is, if y'all weren't here the first time I talked a little bit, that's where I'm wanting to spend some time now, is translate all these things that we've been doing in the community and be more of a resource to classrooms kind of across. Because partly because I believe we have to learn how to talk about these things. The overall work that I do, my initial training, I'm in communication studies. My initial academic training was in argumentation. So how do you make a distinction between a strong argument and a weak argument, and fallacies and logic and credibility and evidence and all those type of things. My early work was much more national. I was trained to be a rhetorical critic for presidential rhetoric. My dissertation looked at how presidents from Johnson to Clinton talked about welfare and poverty issues. And I was always interested in this kind of intersection between democracy and expertise, and how that needs to be kind of a healthy tension. If either side dominates too much, we're in trouble. I was doing well as an academic. I was publishing in the top journals in the field, but all my papers were depressing as hell because they were all about how badly we talked about tough issues. And I started growing more and more frustrated with the national political system because features of how it's designed is we'll tap into kind of incentivize really bad communication, tends to reward bad arguments and punish good ones. And the issues that we're dealing with in a modern society, especially in a diverse democracy, are challenging enough without systems that create a bad incentive process. So when I got to CSU 20 years ago, I shifted from national to local, and I shifted from being a critic to become much more of a practitioner. And the first thing I did, and we'll talk about this a little bit, and I got a chapter written about it, but it's particularly interesting. I took over the debate class. That's one of the core required courses for all communication studies majors. and actually taught it as a debate class the first 2 years. Long story to that, if people were interested. But then once someone finally retired, I shifted and the debate class became a deliberation class. And the assignment significantly changed as I applied at least next hour into some of those things of why that change was so important. So yeah, so now my work academic. I am a tenured faculty member, so I got research responsibilities. Most classes and most of my service is running the center and running these events. We've run over 500 events in the community in the last 18 years on a whole bunch of topics. These are just some of the topics that we've done over the years. Some of these are on campus, a lot of them. We work a lot with the city and the school district and the county and different kind of community organizations. I'll also say that almost every single one of these was the community coming to us, asking for help. As we started the center, each time we ran a meeting, people were like, we need to do this on this issue. And it kind of grew and grew. When I started the CBD, I thought we would pick a topic every semester. My students would study and design a process and see if 20 people would show up at the library for a conversation. But from the very beginning, engaging with the city, literally I needed some signatures on a grant proposal for an advisory board. So I cold called the city and the school district, and they're all like, hey, can you help us with this issue? It was clear that there was such a need for better engagement that the CBD kind of took off. And we were actually the first in the country, as far as I know, that use students in dedicated courses. So there's centers like the CBD that I modeled off of, but most of them just had a core group of faculty that were facilitators. But obviously, most of my job was teaching, so I had to incorporate it into my classes. One of the classes I teach every semester is the training class with CBD. We have now been replicated, so there's about 10 or 15 centers that borrow the CBD model with dedicated coursework kind of across the country. And part of my goal is every college and university in the country has a CBD, both in terms of the skills the students learn, but also in terms of the capacity that it provides. So this is what one of the meetings look like. So 100 people will show up. I've got flyers. We're showing a movie called Undivided next Tuesday at the Lincoln Center. And then we'll have community discussions afterwards that my students will be helping with. We just had to move from the Columbine room to the Canyon West room because we are already over about 125 RSVPs. So now we can have 250 people. So if you're interested, there's slots now. But instead of those 100 people sitting and listening to experts on the stage or walking up to a microphone one at a time, we can put them all at different round tables with my students at each table. These are two of my students, one's facilitating, one's note-taking, trained generally in deliberation and conflict management, and also trained specifically on that. So the heart of deliberation is, someone is designing the process, someone is a facilitator and impartial resource that's designing something in a particular way to help people have the conversations they need to have for democracy to work better. Right? And I'll say I mostly work with like city managers and municipalities and counties and school districts, local communities on how to build this capacity. And from that experience, I'll say about 95% of public process is horrible process design. Once you understand wicked problems and you understand human nature, which is what this presentation is about. Right? So the good news, the bad news is we're really polarized and our engagement is really, really bad right now. The good news is we know how to do this differently, right? So we're building this skill set. We know what works. So obviously learning, what we've learned from the community work, and now how do we build that up in our classroom? The more and more we have our graduates, both at the college level and the K-12 level, that are entering their role as a citizen, as a resident, with a deliberation ready brain, that has retrained their brain away from the outrage to deliberation, that more democracy is going to work well. So, but I'm going to cover this first half. That is always going to be in the way, but I'm going to kind of answer 3 questions or dig into 3 questions. A little bit different than I normally talk because I'm going to dig in a little bit more into polarization, since the title of this was how do we deal with polarizing topics, right? And polarization has really kind of taken off. I just gave a RAM talk about polarization last week in downtown and been digging into that quite a bit. So I'm going to lead with that and answer the question or engage the question of why are we so polarized? Because if you want to depolarize your classroom or if you want to take on polarizing topics well, you have to understand how polarization works first. I'll get into that quite a bit. Then we'll move into, okay, what do we do? Now we understand polarization. How do we change the conversations? That's where we're going to get into wicked problems and get into the deliberative engagement. And the last one, which you can't see, is, okay, what does that all have to do with classroom, right? And mainly that's setting up I have a list right now at the end of a whole bunch of things I'm playing with, tools I'm playing with. Some are ready, some are still I'm kind of working with. So I'm gonna, ask y'all which of these sound most interesting. And then we'll dig into some of those in the second hour, and then some of those I'll keep on developing. And if you're interested, I'll grab your name and email so I can kind of update you as new things kind of get popped into that Google Doc for now, and then potentially maybe a special page on Tilt. That sound good?
Great.
All right. So first, why are we so polarized? So I have two kind of big arguments about polarization, and then kind of a self pushback that introduces a lot of the tough issues that we have to deal with on some of these. But my main two arguments about polarization, first is that polarization is our number one issue. When we're polarized at the toxicity level that we are right now, we can't really function as a democracy. We can't have the conversations we need to have. In some ways, most importantly, perhaps, facts don't work when we're polarized. We know more and more from that research. We like to think as experts, as academics, right? That if the facts are on our side, that's a huge advantage. It is an advantage long-term in the sense that the facts are on your side, they tend to stay on your side, right? But rhetorically, persuasively, facts aren't that powerful. And we actually did some research that I'll kind of touch on that. In some ways, if I'm trying to convince you that you're wrong and we're polarized, right? The better my argument, sometimes the more you backfire. Because your brain still kind of figures out holes. So part of the reality, we have this research that shows high quality information injected into a polarized debate tends to polarize it more. So facts aren't going to save us. Now, if you're completely positive the facts are on your side, again, that's an advantage long term. Part of these questions that we're going to deal with some of these tensions, I serve the impartial role, right? I believe in the need for impartial bridging institutions to help us have a conversation. Deliberative perspective is saying, hey, you have an impartial person that's leading the conversation. Part of the pushback is, do we need the neutrality and the impartiality, or do we need advocacy, right? I also teach social movement classes. I taught protest movement classes, right? So that's a tension. There are certain issues. So deliberation, I think, is a very useful tool, a very underused tool, but not necessarily the right tool for every issue, right? So that question of when should we just be advocates and protest, and when should we try to have a better conversation? You use the word civility, right? Which I know probably when you use it, some of y'all went, for some people, civility is not a great word. Somebody taught social movements, civility was often used to quiet people down, right? To not allow dissent, to protect the status quo. And so for some people, civility is no, this is respectful discourse. There's actually a movement to kind of develop a Northern Colorado civility kind of pact or something like that. And I had to say, well, that word's pretty complex, right? So we either engage the complexities of the word or we avoid the word, right? But some of those tensions, I wanted to start with that, because if you're thinking, no, we shouldn't be neutral about this issue, right? That's part of this discussion, right? The other way I kind of do this, I'm very much a pragmatist, right? So some issues I deal with are clearly these wicked problems, like reasonable people on all different sides. And then there's some issues I deal with that I'm like, it's pretty clear, a lot more evidence on one side, or a better collection of values on one side. It still becomes a question of what's the best way to move the needle. I still often, because of the debilitating impact of polarization, I still think, even if it's clear one side's got a better argument, that a good deliberative conversation is going to be the most likely one to make that real. Part of it is, in a polarized environment, calling out the other side for misinformation doesn't really do it. So we have to decide what's the best tool. So that's the number one issue. If we don't deal with our toxic polarization level, I don't think we can make progress on any of the big challenges we have. I got a good friend that does a lot of stuff on climate change and constantly makes the argument, there's no way we're going to take on climate change with one party. We have to figure out a way to cut across differences. Right? And I think that's the same thing with race. I think that's the same thing with a lot of our issues. If an issue gets tied from one party to the other, I think the conversation is undermined and we can't do anything. So we have to figure out ways of doing that. That all being said, I also believe polarization is greatly exaggerated. Most of it's not real. Most of it's manufactured. I still believe the first one, because the perception of polarization is more important than the reality. If we think we're polarized, we get all the bad stuff. Right? So it's still the number one issue, even though it's not real. The good news of the second point, though, is since it's not real, it's not that hard to undo, particularly at the local level. Number one question after my talk is always like, how can we do what you're doing at the national level, right? And there's a reason I fled the national level to go local, because at the local level, you can change these things. My hope is long-term, like the more and more cities learn how to talk, the better it's gonna be, and we'll start demanding it, right? Because there is, you'll see at the end, a very positive feedback. The more you do this, the easier it is to do, and the more frustrated you get with what we're getting at the national level. So yeah, since it's greatly exaggerated, we run 500 meetings on some really, really tough issue. And almost every single one of those, we have these aha moments when people have their shifts. And for me, that's the key. If we want to change people's hearts and minds, throwing facts at them don't work. Attacking them doesn't work, right? Taking them seriously, having a genuine conversation is the most likely thing for them to actually have the shift that we want. So there's 5 big causes of polarization that are worth tapping into. I think we need to understand this. And the first and most important is human nature, as I've already said. The unfortunate reality that we're much more wired for outrage and polarization than we are for deliberation and collaboration. I spent about 4 years digging into the brain science and social psychology, starting about 8 years ago or so. Mostly was because I did the stadium process. And people were so polarized on that from the very beginning that it's like, I needed to learn why that was and how do you do it. So I engaged that literature very much from a practitioner perspective. How can I design processes that work with people's brains? I think I probably already said it. I design processes that are designed to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and tap into the best. So human nature is a big part of it. So I'll dig into this. I'm going to go through some of these slides pretty quickly, right? If you want deeper analysis, I'm going to send you some stuff I've written or other videos. But these are just some of the books that I read as kind of part of this process. You'll see, I like books. I'm a professor because it was the only job that will pay me to read most of my days. And people always said I need more graphics on my slides. So then I'm like, hey, I'll just give you book titles. So this one won a Nobel Prize that we prefer to think fast. The term they use is we're cognitive minders. We don't want to think if we don't have to, but we have the ability to think slow. This becomes that question of how can we shift people from fast thinking to slow thinking when we need some nuance, when we need to have a deeper, more difficult conversation. You're not smart in 46 other ways you're polluting yourself, how your brain distorts and deceives. You're starting to see the negative kind of bent of these books, right? My favorite title is What Makes Your Brain Happy and Why You Should Do the Opposite. Jonathan Haidt's work does a really good job of the moral foundation, particularly between progressives and conservatives and how they're thinking and how to understand that kind of across difference. This is a classic work written in the 90s on why do people hold on to misinformation, even though all the research shows them that they're wrong, right? Why does bad data keep on kind of living and help us understand that? This one, the depth of expertise, is how we're shifting that tension between democracy and expertise. That needs to be a healthy tension. It's pretty unhealthy these days, right? Really the respect for all our institutions that are relevant to democracy, whether that's higher ed, whether that's expertise, whether that's journalism, whether that's, it's in danger. I won't have a slide for this, but one quick part of another presentation I often do, I talk about the 2 challenges of information overload and then polarization and how they affect each other. Information overload is just for information disorders, a new academic term some are using. Our ability to produce and share information has just exploded. Right now with AI, machines are producing information, right? So if you look at how much, terabytes or zettabytes or whatever, I have some charts in there, we're creating more information every year than has ever been created in the rest of history in terms of like the amount of words, right? And that's just going to keep on getting worse and worse and worse. Our ability to process that information, to make sense of it, to make distinctions between good information and bad information, and to go from just raw data and noise to insight, to knowledge, to hopefully wisdom, has not only lagged, certainly not kept up with the expansion of noise, but has been undermined because of the loss of trust in expertise in universities. All the institutions that used to help us make sense of that noise has lost. So we're in a tough situation here, right? And then polarization then weaponizes that, and then misinformation, disinformation. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. That we need to understand how people are taking advantage of this, right? This one's a particularly important one, the bias that divides us. Now, probably all heard of confirmation bias or my side bias. some distinctions between those two, but they're not too relevant now. One point that Keith makes that I think is particularly important, he argues for most biases, the more educated you are and the smarter you are, the more you tend to come to naturally control the bias, you overcome it, except for my side bias. The smarter you are, the more educated you are, the better you are at finding evidence that you're right and refuting evidence that challenges you. This isn't uneducated people that are easy to manipulate. This is 20-year PhDs who might have made a decision 20 years ago and has spent 20 years confirming that and seeing the world through certain blinders. So that's the challenge of how our kind of brains work, right? So from all that research, I'm going to have 5 big things that I talk about. I have about a 70-page report that summarizes this with all the citations if people are interested. It is about 5 years old now. I've got a folder about this big. I'm on sabbatical next fall, so I'll update it and write my book. But been trying to keep track, nothing huge that really kind of changes a lot of things. But some of the key themes, one is we crave certainty and consistency. That's the modified bias. Once we make a decision, our brain is wired to defend that decision and to protect that decision. Second, we're suckers for a good versus evil narrative. This is the reality that we are narrative creatures. We think in terms of story, and our favorite story is a simple good versus evil story. We love our heroes and our victims and our villains. And once we decide who's playing that character, we see their actions, their words through that lens. We make assumptions about motives. And heroes do heroic things and villains do evil things. I often have a picture of Disney villains here. I've got 3 kids. I've watched lots of Disney movies over my life, right? And at least the traditional Disney is getting complicated now. So there's a paper I want to write there. But traditional Disney movies, it's just a simple good versus evil story. And just think of the initial Disney villains. They were just evil, right? They were just bad. They just wanted control. And they were winning halfway through the movie, right? So everyone started getting anxious, but then good makes a comeback and they vanquish evil and we live happily ever after. And we're kind of training our kids from the very beginning of like, when there's a problem, look for the villain. You solve problems by getting rid of the bad people. Come back to that in a little bit of why that's so problematic. And then third, we're groupish. This is Jonathan Haidt's term. We're groupish. I prefer that to tribal. There's a lot of books, you'll see some of them, that talk about tribalism and political tribe. Tribe is a more complicated term. I don't like to put so much negative into kind of tribal in a way, right? And I also like his term because it also highlights that we're not selfish. And this is a critical aspect of human nature. We are social beings. We are designed to be in teams and to be in groups. We are actually one of the most cooperative species that exists in the world. We very much go beyond blood ties, where most animals do not. There's a lot of good in that. There's a lot of power. There's a lot of pro-social behavior because we connect beyond and create cities and create language, all these things we do. On the flip side, the worst things humans have ever done is because of this as well. Because we define us, we define a them, we dehumanize a them, and we justify atrocities. This question of groupishness, this question of us and them, that humans are unique to. One of the books is called Making Monsters. We're the only species that actually creates villains in a way, right? That's part of our basic narrative of how we think about it. Horrible stuff and wonderful stuff. I explain what I try to do is design processes to avoid triggering the worst of human nature and tackle the best. That's the heart of what we do, right? How do we use identity? How do we use these groups in very different ways? In ways that don't just divide us and put us against each other, but help us kind of work together in different things. Part of my shift from national politics to local. National politics, there's 2 teams. There's a red team and a blue team. There's a zero-sum game with winner-take-all elections. Start getting a sense of why our national system brings out the worst in human nature, right? But maybe in Fort Collins, your primary team is Northern Colorado, right? You have a different identity. The more we have cross-cutting identities that do different things, and you'll see, one of the reasons we're so polarized is we're losing a lot of our cross-cutting identities. Fourth, and this is going back to my organization roots, because of these 3 things, we're really good at filtering and cherry picking information, finding what we want to find out of it. Y'all know about cherry picking, pick the example that fits it. The other term now is called net picking, right? And the internet's really good at nitpicking. That's taking a horrible example of the other side and sending it to all your friends, right? And that's what politics has become. You're just looking for anyone on the other side to say something really stupid or offensive or problematic, right? So that you can send it to all your friends and say, that's what all of them think, right? And that just kind of further reifies how wonderful my side is and how horrible the other side is. So this is so important. I dig into it quite a bit. I'm going to do this fast. But these 5 stages of motivated reasoning, the concept of motivated reasoning is we're motivated to think in a certain way. We like to think that we're motivated for accuracy or for truth, but generally the default is we're motivated to protect our team, right? We're motivated to protect the decisions that we've already made. These are chronological stages. The first stage is, who do we even get information from, right? What news station do we watch? Who do we have conversations about? Right? Generally, selective exposure, we tend to pick the people that tell us what we want to hear in most cases. If you don't, sometimes you do this consciously, right? Sometimes you do it subconsciously, you don't realize it. And then sometimes your computer does it for you without you even realizing it. Okay? You Google something on your computer and you're always picking a progressive link, your computer knows you like progressive stuff and it's going to highlight that stuff, right? So it's creating a bubble without you even knowing it in certain situations. Same thing, how we interpret it. So this is bias on what gets to our ears. This is bias on how we process it. This quote from, it's actually Jonathan Haidt paraphrasing Tom Gilovich, 2 of the books I kind of showed, but it's been haunting me for the last 8 years, right? But they summarize the research of when we want to believe something, the question we ask is, can I believe? And if there's just a little bit of evidence that we're done, we can stop thinking. But if we don't want to believe something, the question we ask is, must I believe this? And the rules of evidence are flipped. I just need a little bit of evidence to push it back. This is huge in terms of motivation, and I see this all the time. I see this within my own family, okay? You have one example of the media being biased against your side. That one example is enough to dismiss anything the media says that you don't like. You have one example, there was an example probably 10 years ago now of some of the climate scientists that were part of the IPCC kind of process, that someone kind of hacked them and got some of the emails back and forth. It ended out that these were pretty benign, but taken out of context, some of those emails seemed like they were cooking the books. Every single time I've seen anything on IPC coming out, that one example comes back, right? The people that want to dismiss climate science can use that one example. So this is kind of how our brains work, right? We don't look at the preponderance of all the evidence, right? We look at the evidence that fits our perspective, particularly those that support the narrative we want. One other way to think about this is our brains are really, really good at fitting any new evidence to fit our perspective rather than to allow it to challenge it. You've probably seen that in the election, right? Something happens, and you're like, clearly this is going to show the other side that we're right and they're wrong. And the other side interprets it in a way of it proves they're right. One simple example, every time it seems like Trump does something horrible, right? Everyone on the left, like, see how horrible he is. Everyone on the right is, see how everyone's out to get them, right? The media is just out to get them. Anything is excused because they have that narrative. And it actually reinforces their narrative rather than challenges it. It's just more proof that the media is out to get them. So another way to think about this is new stuff I've been kind of playing with, particularly I think will be useful for classrooms. Our brain tends to like to think catty corner. Okay? We're really good at seeing the upside of our perspective and comparing it to the downside of the opposing perspective, because that gives us comfort. That's what our brain likes. So it's so clear I'm right. So obviously, if I'm thinking like blue and you're thinking like gray, we're pretty far apart, right? I'm thinking, how can anyone prefer this to this, right? But you're thinking, how can anyone prefer this to this? And our brains are kind of wired for that. And you'll see how kind of this keeps on getting worse. This is the base. This is how our brain wants to think. And then you'll see how our systems make it worse. Then how we make attributions. We tend to remember information in terms of story. So there's a lot of biases there. One in particular, I'll talk about negativity bias. Humans are much more attuned to bad news and negative. Those settle more. We're much more concerned about potentially losing something than gaining something. And you'll see how that impacts lots of things down the line, right? This was George Bush, probably now 6 or 7 years ago, after an ambush of police officers in Dallas. But his quote actually captures the literature pretty well. Too often we judge other groups by their worst examples while judging ourselves by our best intentions. Our assumptions about motives are huge. We assume our side always has good motives, so we kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. And we assume the other side always has bad motives. One of the, I was in college in the heyday of Rush Limbaugh, and I was at Texas A&M, right? Rush Limbaugh would actually be playing at every single restaurant at lunch, right? It was, and he was the master of this initially, right? Of telling people, this is how liberals think. This is what they want. I tell everyone now, whenever anyone on your side is telling you the motives of the other side, alarm bells should go off. Right? Because they're probably not, they probably don't know those motives, and they're doing it more strategically, right? Asking people, why do you think this way, right? Tell me the story of how you come to think this way is a much more powerful thing to understand their motives. And then how we make decisions, we use kind of biases, and then even what we remember, right? Our memory is quite biased. We love those examples that fit our perspective, and we're pretty good at shoehorning those. So that leads all to this point. It's been pretty important here a little bit. Our brains are really bad at dilemmas. We want simplicity. We want certainty. We don't want tensions and paradoxes and dilemmas and so on. And you'll see the heart of my work is to lean into those in lots of important places. Right? And this will become important in terms of applying to the classroom. To what degree are you designing your classes and you're designing your assignments for students to lean into the tensions? When I took over the debate class, actually, it's probably worth telling this story now. When I took over the debate class, the design of the class was this: 24 students, 6 teams of 4. They had to pick a specific topic. I forced them to pick a tough, controversial topic. They had to frame it as a yes/no question, which now I know was horrible. But back then, I was doing it the way it's been done for 50 years. Right? The person that wrote the textbook was on transitional retirement, but still teaching it, right? And they said, you can change it, it's your class now. I'm like, I'm not gonna make him teach it my way the last 2 years. So I taught it his way for 2 years. And then as soon as he officially retired, then I'm like, okay, now we're changing it. So, should we build a wall, right? 2 people answering yes, 2 people answering no. Anyone do competitive debate in college or high school, right? So it's kind of this debate process. Forced them to research like crazy, right? So a huge brief, they had to have all these sources and so forth, teaching them how to research. And then they would eventually have a debate, right? And then they would switch sides and have a debate again. Right? I would always make the second debate a little shorter. So I had 10 minutes at the end, because, the debates would take 2/3 of the class, right? Because, each debate was one, we had 6 debates, we had 12 debates, that's 12 class periods, right? So I could tell them, you're no longer affirmative or negative, you're just a real person that has researched this for 6 months. What is your personal opinion on this issue? What do you think about 85% of them answered? Answer was some form of, I don't know. Most of them picked an issue because they're passionate about it, right? Some of them picked an issue because they weren't there that day, so they got assigned it the next day, right? But most of them picked an issue because, no, we need to build a wall, or building a wall is ridiculous, right? But then when forced to research both sides, it started getting more complicated, right? And part of what I really didn't like about that class, the main lesson we taught was better debaters always won. Right? So the yes would win the first debate, and the no would win the second debate. And they learned, okay, evidence and argument doesn't matter. All that matters is personal skill. And I thought that was a really bad lesson teaching students, right? But what I really figured out once I started learning more about deliberation was I'm forcing them to a yes/no question. And then I'm assigning them, I'm actually telling them, your answer is yes, go find evidence of it. Your answer is no, go find evidence of it. No one was looking for compromise. No one was looking for innovation. No one was looking to transcend tensions. No one was looking at a different way of doing it. I had 100% of the group was either yes or no. That was horrible design once you know how our brains work. Our brains make a decision and then go find evidence of it. I designed the assignment to reinforce that. Most of our assignments do that. I teach public speaking, I teach, how many of our assignments are pick your thesis and then go research and find evidence of it. I think that's reinforcing really bad thinking. So a lot of the research what we do in that class now is they pick a topic, but then they're asking a question, hey, what should we do about X? X being a wicked problem, and we'll get into it in a second. And then their job as a team of 4 is to come up with a discussion guide to help other people talk about this issue in a more productive way. This is one of the examples I'll show you. The discussion guide is a critical tool of deliberative engagement and a wonderful assignment for students to do. Instead of them picking a side and becoming an advocate, right? Their job is to be the analyst, to be the facilitator, to research all sides and do the hard work to understand the issue, to lay out the choices for other people. Okay, so big question, what should we do about X? There's always at least three, we always want to get away from two, three approaches, sometimes more. We like the word approaches, because none of them are perfect. None of them are magic bullet, right? They each have a set of actions. They each have a set of arguments for them. They each have a set of values that really supports, and they each have some values that they don't do very well. There's going to be inherent trade-offs for any of them because there's no magic bullet for these type of issues. So their job now is to research like crazy. What does the research say? What do the facts say? But in the end, what we should do about X is a value question that we don't want experts to answer for us. We want experts to help us set up the tough value conversations and tensions that we have. So not sure what got me into that one better. But so that class is all designed now for them to lean into the tensions and to look for the tensions versus what our brains want to do, which is to avoid the tensions or to frame things strategically as if there is no tension. All right, so then I'll do these faster. So then the political system, we start with human nature, our brains are wired for this, and then the political system completely takes advantage. A two-party winner-take-all system is horribly a great fit to the worst of our human nature. In so many different ways. So what it does is it takes the either-or thinking and first incentivizes it, right? Because in an election, right? If I'm, say, on the right and y'all are the political spectrum, right? An election, I don't even bother talking to you. You're not gonna vote for me, right? So I'm mainly trying to mobilize you, make sure you vote for me and put your signs up and send me money. And then maybe frame certain issues to try to wedge issues to get you on my side, right? Which incentivizes me saying horrible things about them, right? And often because of negativity bias, I know trying to tell you that I'll fix the problem, that still works. Like, you know, I'm the only one that can fix your problems. You've been hearing that lately, right? But mainly what works is telling me how horrible things are gonna be if you like her. So we have, it taps into negativity bias. So it's this, but with a really big bottom, right? And it's incentivized, right? So obviously an election ad is gonna focus on the upside of my perspective and the downside of theirs, and most of the downside. I heard a story not too long ago, like what would happen if the airline industry did advertising like politics? Like every ad was how bad the other airlines are, right? Like look at this crash, and look at these mechanics cutting corners, and look at, you know, like no one would ever fly. We hate the airline industry. We hate all our politicians, right? I think their approval is like 7% or something. Because of the ads that we had in the system that we set. The business model for politics brings out the worst in human nature and makes it really, really hard for us to have the conversations we need to have. And unfortunately, our national political system, because of changes in journalism and so forth, is the dominant way we think about issues. They kind of set the agenda on how to talk about immigration, how to talk about race, how to talk, you know, so the dominant model that we're getting on how to talk is a horrible. Okay. So how do we in our classrooms provide a different alternative? So it takes either or thinking and what I'm calling now two-party partisan thinking, which is either or thinking on steroids. So lots of different books you see here, a lot of them kind of use tribes that are trying to explore, okay, how do we learn this? This one in particular, I'm just reading now, Our Tribal Future, how to channel our foundational human instincts to a force for good, right? How do we shift that? How do we get better? The power, oh, I don't have that one on here. There's I think I have it later. The power of us is another one, right? I spent a lot of time on the negative, understanding the bad of human nature. Now I'm shifting a lot more to the good. Like, okay, how do we tap in the best parts? And we'll talk more about that kind of later. This one is another particular kind of, like earlier about the more we have cross-cutting identities, the better. Her argument is all our identities are starting to line up in a bad way. We kind of have the left and the left, right? And the blue, red and the blue. And then the right now is becoming more rural. The right is more religious. The right is more white. The right is more, and then the left becomes, okay, the left is cities. The left is multicultural. The left is LGBTQ. Yeah. So all of a sudden, all our identities are dominated by a left and right.